Sarah had been cleaning classrooms for over a decade now. The school hallways, once a reminder of her unfulfilled dreams, had become nothing more than another place where time drifted away in the hum of a broom and dustpan. She was 47 years old, black, and had long given up on her ambitions of becoming a mathematician. Instead, Sarah had settled into a routine that paid the bills. She worked quietly, without complaint, in the background of the bustling school. But today was different. As she was sweeping the floor in a math classroom, the teacher, Mr. Harper, walked in. He was tall, with a thick beard that made him look perpetually gruff, though Sarah knew he had a soft spot for his students. She had seen him teaching in this classroom countless times, but never once did he acknowledge her beyond a polite nod. Mr. Harper, however, had no idea that Sarah had once been a math prodigy, a young woman who had conquered calculus without breaking a sweat in her college years. She had been full of potential, with a bright future ahead of her. But life had other plans. Responsibilities, a family to care for, and the need to make ends meet led her to give up on her education and work as a janitor at the school. The sound of Mr. Harper's voice broke her thoughts as he walked into the room, looking distracted as usual. His tone was light, almost teasing, as he approached Sarah. "You know, Sarah," he said with a chuckle, "maybe you should try solving some calculus next time instead of just sweeping up the dust. Who knows? You might be the next great mathematician." Sarah froze, the broom held loosely in her hands. She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. He had never spoken to her like that before. It wasn't a direct insult, but it wasn't exactly respectful either. She looked up at him, trying to read his expression. He didn't seem to notice the weight of his words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more in that joke. For a moment, she stood there, staring at Mr. Harper, trying to decide whether or not to respond. Her mind swirled with the memory of the young woman she used to be, the confident, determined student who had excelled in mathematics. She had been on track to graduate with honors, until life circumstances had pulled her off course. But as Mr. Harper's laughter faded, something inside Sarah stirred. What if she could solve a calculus problem? Just to prove to herself that she still had it. Maybe this was the push she needed. After all, it had been years since she'd even thought about her math skills, but the challenge, no matter how small, ignited a spark. "You think so, Mr. Harper?" she asked, her voice steady but with a hint of curiosity. Mr. Harper, already moving toward his desk, glanced back over his shoulder and gave her a casual wave. "I'm just kidding, Sarah. But if you ever want to give it a try, I'd love to see how you do." He didn't wait for her to respond before he was buried in papers, completely unaware of the effect his words had on her. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart racing as she stared down at the broom in her hands. She wasn't sure why, but a challenge had been issued, and something deep inside her felt the urge to take it on. She hadn't thought about math in so long. Could she still remember it? Could she still solve the problems that once came so easily to her? She shook her head, muttering under her breath. "What am I thinking? I'm just a janitor now. It's not like I can go back to college or anything. It's too late for that." But as she swept up the dust in the corners of the room, the idea wouldn't leave her mind. That night, after finishing her shift and returning to her small apartment, Sarah pulled out the dusty, old calculus textbook that had been buried under piles of paperwork. The pages were yellowed with age, and the spine was cracked, but it was still intact. She ran her fingers over the familiar equations, feeling a wave of nostalgia. For a long time, she had convinced herself that she could never go back to being that person, the girl with dreams of mathematical theories and complex theorems. But now, as she sat in her worn-out chair, her mind raced with memories of the hours spent in the library, the joy of solving problems that seemed impossible. "What if I could still do this?" she whispered to herself. Without overthinking it, she turned to the first chapter and began reading. It was slow at first, she had forgotten much of the terminology and some of the techniques, but soon enough, the pattern started to come back. It was like riding a bike. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed a pencil and began working through a problem. The numbers clicked together, the formulas made sense again, and the feeling of mastery washed over her like it had so many years ago. She smiled to herself as the hours ticked by. She hadn't solved everything yet, but the spark was there. It was as if the old Sarah, the confident student, was resurfacing from somewhere deep inside her. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe it was never too late. The next morning, Sarah returned to the school for her usual shift. Her heart was still racing from the night before, but this time, she felt a little different. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she found herself glancing into classrooms, noticing the chalkboards full of equations, the students hunched over desks, and the teachers lecturing passionately. She thought about Mr. Harper's words and the challenge that had been thrown her way. It was just a joke, right? He probably hadn't even meant it. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it had planted a seed in her mind. What if she could do something more? What if, instead of being the woman who cleaned up the messes left by others, she could be the one who made a real difference? As she cleaned the math classroom again, Sarah felt the familiar tension of her old dreams. She glanced at the chalkboard, where a few calculus problems still lingered, and made a quiet vow to herself: she would rise to the challenge. "I'm going to solve calculus again," she whispered under her breath, determination hardening in her chest. "I'm not finished yet." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah had never expected her life to take the path it had. As a young woman, she had been full of ambition, dreams of academic success, and the belief that anything was possible. Her childhood had been difficult, but she had always been able to find comfort and solace in the world of numbers. When others found math difficult and intimidating, Sarah found it exhilarating, like solving a puzzle that was waiting for her to unlock it. Growing up in a small town, Sarah had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background. Her family, working class and struggling, didn't fully understand her love for math. Her parents had always pushed her to focus on practical skills, something that would help her earn a living. But Sarah knew deep down that she had a gift, one that set her apart from her peers. She attended the local community college on a scholarship, where she quickly became known as one of the brightest students in the mathematics department. She devoured calculus textbooks, breezed through algebra, and even found herself tutoring her classmates. The professors were impressed with her ability to solve even the most complex problems with ease. But life wasn't kind to Sarah. After her second year of college, her mother fell ill, and Sarah had to drop out to care for her. The scholarship money ran out, and she couldn't afford to continue her education. The weight of responsibilities, taking care of her family, making sure bills were paid, and keeping food on the table, pushed aside her dreams of becoming a mathematician. She found herself back in her hometown, working odd jobs to make ends meet. Eventually, she landed the janitorial position at the local high school. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and it gave her a sense of stability. She found a rhythm in her routine, one that allowed her to push aside the crushing disappointment that lingered at the back of her mind. The young woman with dreams of calculus had become a quiet janitor, moving from room to room, sweeping away the dust, making everything neat again. It was safer this way. But every now and then, she would see a chalkboard filled with equations or hear a student talking about a math problem. And that old feeling would creep in, the spark, the curiosity, the desire to understand. But Sarah had long since learned to ignore those feelings. She was a janitor, after all. Her place was in the background, not in the classroom. That was until last night. The words Mr. Harper had casually thrown out at her came rushing back to her mind. "Maybe you should try solving some calculus next time instead of just sweeping up the dust." His words stung, but not in the way he probably intended. She had recognized the subtle implication, that she, a janitor, could never possibly be good at something like math, especially calculus. It was a harmless joke to him, but for Sarah, it was a challenge, one that brought her back to a part of herself she had buried long ago. After returning home and pulling out her old calculus textbook, Sarah had spent the night immersed in formulas and equations. It was like stepping into a world she had long since left behind, but the numbers came alive again under her fingers. Slowly, she remembered the rules and strategies. Slowly, the doubt that had haunted her for so long began to fade. It wasn't too late. She could still do this. The next morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. The weight of her past seemed a little lighter. She wasn't just Sarah, the janitor anymore. She was someone with a potential that was untapped, and she wasn't going to let it go to waste. As she entered the school that day, she felt a mix of determination and trepidation. She wasn't sure what she was going to do next, whether she would ever tell anyone about her late-night study session or if she would just quietly continue working through the calculus problems on her own. But she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. What if she could be more than just a janitor? What if, despite everything life had thrown her way, she could still reclaim her academic dreams? By the time her shift started, Sarah had a plan. She would keep practicing calculus every night, slowly rebuilding the knowledge that she had lost over the years. It was a long shot, but she didn't care. The challenge was there, and she wasn't going to back down. She was determined to prove that she wasn't just a woman with a dustpan. She was a woman with a mind, a brilliant, capable mind that deserved to be recognized. As the school day began, Sarah cleaned the classrooms with her usual quiet focus, but this time, she wasn't just going through the motions. She was thinking about her next steps, her plans for the future. When she walked past Mr. Harper's classroom, she glanced in through the window and saw him lecturing to a group of students, his voice animated as he explained a complicated concept. In that moment, Sarah wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could be part of that world again. But the thought was fleeting. She wasn't ready to share her plans with anyone yet, not even with Mr. Harper. For now, she kept her focus on the math problems she had been practicing the night before. Every calculation, every step brought her closer to the woman she used to be, the woman who had been capable of solving calculus problems that others struggled with. And then, as if on cue, the door to the classroom opened. Mr. Harper appeared in the doorway, holding a pile of papers in his hands. He looked over at Sarah, who was wiping down a desk, and nodded. "Hey, Sarah," he called out casually, not knowing the storm of thoughts brewing inside her. She smiled faintly, giving him a quick nod in return. But then, before she could stop herself, she found herself speaking. "Mr. Harper, about that calculus problem. I might just take you up on your challenge." He paused, raising an eyebrow. "You're serious?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "I am," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I used to be good at math. I think it's time I proved it." Mr. Harper blinked a few times, clearly taken aback, but there was something in his eyes, respect, maybe, or curiosity, that made Sarah's heart race. He didn't know what he was dealing with. And he had no idea just how much of a challenge he had unknowingly thrown her way. "Well, I'm intrigued now," he said with a smirk. "Let's see what you can do, Sarah." And as Sarah looked at him, a quiet confidence settled in her chest. She was no longer just Sarah, the janitor. She was Sarah, the woman who had once been a math genius, and, maybe, still could be. The following days at the school felt different for Sarah. Every time she walked through the hallways, she found herself glancing toward the math classrooms, her mind swirling with the thought of calculus problems she hadn't solved in years. The textbook she had pulled out the night before now rested beside her bed, its pages filled with equations and theories that, for so long, had seemed like distant memories. She had dusted off those old thoughts, and now they were alive again, pushing her forward. As the days passed, Sarah worked tirelessly on the calculus problems each night, her mind becoming sharper and more focused with every equation she solved. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. It felt like she was coming back to herself. Slowly but surely, the formulas and theorems returned, and she began to believe that, despite everything she had put aside for years, she still had what it took. But, as much as Sarah believed in herself, doubts crept in from time to time. What if she wasn't as good as she used to be? What if all those years of cleaning classrooms and mopping floors had dulled her mind, made her forget everything she once knew? The questions haunted her at night when she lay in bed, trying to drift off to sleep, but they never fully consumed her. Every time the doubt appeared, she fought it off, telling herself that she wasn't done yet. It was during one of these late-night sessions that the idea came to her, maybe it was time to face Mr. Harper's challenge. She hadn't told anyone about what she was doing, not even her best friend, Linda, who had been the one to encourage her to go back to school all those years ago. Linda had always believed in her. But Sarah didn't want to tell anyone yet. This had to be her journey. Her decision. As the school day approached, Sarah began to prepare. She decided that she would walk into Mr. Harper's classroom and ask him for a real challenge. No more idle jokes. No more passing comments. She would ask for a problem, one that tested her skills, her abilities. The same skills she had buried under years of mops and brooms. When she arrived at the school, her mind was racing with thoughts of what she would say, how she would approach Mr. Harper. She had spent the morning going over the most complex problems she had solved the night before. She wasn't sure what he would think or say, but she couldn't back down now. By lunchtime, she found herself standing outside the math classroom, staring at the door for a moment before taking a deep breath. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew that this moment would define something inside her, whether it was her return to math or her complete surrender to the years that had passed. As she hesitated, Mr. Harper appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of papers. He looked surprised to see her standing there. "Sarah? What's up?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Sarah cleared her throat. This wasn't going to be easy. "I was wondering," she began, her voice a little shaky but growing stronger, "if you could give me a real calculus problem. One that I can solve. I mean, a real test." Mr. Harper blinked, clearly taken aback. He looked at her for a moment, as though weighing her words. "Wait, you're serious? You actually want to solve one of my problems?" His voice was tinged with disbelief. Sarah nodded. "Yes. I want to prove to you that I can do it." Mr. Harper set the papers down on his desk and studied her for a moment. "All right, then. I'll give you a problem. But let's be clear, Sarah, this isn't a joke anymore. If you want to do this, you better be ready for the challenge." Her heart raced in her chest, but she stood her ground. "I'm ready." Mr. Harper gave a slow smile, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Okay, then. I'm going to give you a problem straight from my last lecture. It's a bit advanced, but I think you might be able to handle it." He scribbled a problem on the board. Find the limit of the function as x approaches infinity for the expression lim x infinity 4x2 plus 3x minus 52x2 plus 5x plus 7 backslash lim underscore x backslash to backslash infinity backslash frac for x squared plus 3x minus 5, 2x squared plus 5x plus 7, x infinity lim 2x2 plus 5x plus 74x2 plus 3x minus 5. It wasn't the hardest problem he could give, but it was definitely a step above what most students could handle, especially on the spot. "There you go. Show me what you've got." Sarah took a deep breath, scanning the equation. A sense of focus washed over her, pushing away all the doubts. This was what she had trained for all those years ago. She could do this. She pulled out her notebook and began to write down the steps. Her hands moved smoothly over the page as she worked through the problem methodically, calculating the degrees of the polynomials, simplifying the terms, and finally getting to the limit. As she wrote, she could feel Mr. Harper's eyes on her. The silence in the classroom was thick, but Sarah was too absorbed in the problem to care. She had worked this type of problem 1,000 times before in college. The answer came to her quickly, just like it used to. Finally, she finished, her pencil resting on the paper. She looked up at Mr. Harper, who was still standing near the door, watching her with an intrigued expression. "Done," Sarah said, sliding the notebook across the desk toward him. Mr. Harper picked it up and began to review her work. The second stretched out, and Sarah couldn't read his expression. She had no idea if she had gotten everything right or if he would dismiss it as nothing special. He was a teacher, after all, and he had likely seen students solve similar problems. But this wasn't just about the problem, it was about her. It was about proving to herself that she hadn't lost it, that she could still be that woman who understood the elegance of calculus. Finally, Mr. Harper looked up from the notebook, a surprised expression crossing his face. "Well, I'll be honest. I didn't expect you to get it right on the first try." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. I got it right." Mr. Harper smiled, a little amazed now. "Yeah, you did. I wasn't sure what to expect, but you've got the right answer. You've got some serious skills, Sarah." Her chest swelled with pride, but there was a quiet humility in her voice. "It's been a long time, but I used to be good at this." Mr. Harper took a step back, running a hand through his hair. "I think you might be more than just good. I had no idea you were this sharp." For a moment, the room was silent. Sarah felt a warmth inside her. It wasn't about impressing Mr. Harper, it was about proving to herself that she wasn't just a janitor. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned the classrooms. She was the woman who could solve calculus, who could take on challenges and rise to meet them. "You know," Mr. Harper said, his tone shifting slightly, "I think I underestimated you. You might want to think about going back to school. You've definitely still got it." Sarah paused for a moment, considering his words. She had thought about it, of course. But the idea of going back to school seemed so far-fetched. Still, there was something in his words that made her heart beat faster. Maybe it wasn't too late after all. "I'll think about it," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. As she left the classroom, the weight of the challenge lifted off her shoulders. She had proven something to herself, she could still do this. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start thinking about the next chapter in her life. Sarah walked out of Mr. Harper's classroom with her mind buzzing. She had done it. She had solved the problem, and not only did she get it right, but Mr. Harper seemed genuinely impressed. There was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in years, a sense of pride that was hard to shake off. She could feel something inside her stirring, an ember of hope, reigniting after years of being smothered. As she walked down the hallway, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. What Mr. Harper had said echoed in her mind, "You might want to think about going back to school." It seemed impossible, but the idea was so compelling that it refused to leave her. It wasn't just the idea of returning to school that filled her with excitement, it was the thought of doing something for herself. Something that didn't involve sweeping floors or scrubbing windows. Something that would prove to the world, and to herself, that she was more than what she had become. It felt like a fresh start, but also like a reclaiming of the person she used to be, the young woman with a passion for math and the world at her feet. However, as she moved through the halls, Sarah quickly reminded herself that it wasn't that simple. She had responsibilities, bills to pay, her mother to take care of, and the steady job at the high school. She had worked hard to build her life here, even if it wasn't glamorous. She had made peace with it. Still, as she reached the door to the janitor's closet, she found herself hesitating. Her fingers gripped the door handle, but her mind was far from the job at hand. What if? The question kept looping in her mind. What if she could do both? What if she could go back to school and keep working? Could she handle the workload, the stress, the financial strain? She shook her head, as if to rid herself of the nagging doubts. One thing at a time, she reminded herself. But then, just as she was about to open the door to the closet, she heard a voice behind her. Sarah. She turned to see Mr. Harper hurrying toward her. He had a serious look on his face, and she could tell that he wasn't simply trying to make small talk. "Hey, Mr. Harper," she greeted him with a polite smile. "I was thinking about what you said earlier," he began, his voice thoughtful. "You're really serious about this, aren't you? About going back to school?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I'm not sure yet. It's just, well, it's a lot to think about. I don't even know where to begin." Mr. Harper stopped in front of her, his expression softening. "I think you should go for it," he said. "But I get it. It's a huge step. That's why I'm offering you something." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Offering me something?" He smiled slightly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "I know a program at the university. Well, it's more of a community outreach program for people in situations like yours. It helps adults who didn't finish their degrees and want to go back to school. They offer scholarships, flexible class schedules, even tutoring. It's designed to make the transition easier. I'm a mentor in that program, and I think you'd be a perfect candidate." Sarah blinked, her heart racing. This was a dream, wasn't it? Was he serious? "I know it sounds too good to be true," Mr. Harper continued, "but I've seen people in situations just like yours succeed. They've gone from cleaning offices to graduating with honors. It's not easy, but if you're willing to put in the work, it's possible." For a moment, Sarah could hardly speak. She was overwhelmed. The thought of going back to school after so many years of putting it all behind her felt surreal. The life she had built, the janitorial work, the low expectations, could she really break free from that? Could she really walk into a classroom again and pursue her dreams? "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I mean, I haven't been in school for years. I don't know if I'm even qualified for something like that." "You've got what it takes," Mr. Harper said, his voice firm and reassuring. "The work you did the other day, that's proof enough. You've got the drive, the intellect. I'm telling you, Sarah, you just need the opportunity. And this program is your chance." Sarah took a deep breath. The possibility of going back to school had always seemed like an impossible dream. But now, right in front of her, was an actual opportunity, a lifeline. She had to ask herself, what if this was it? What if this was the chance she had been waiting for? "I don't know," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Mr. Harper. "It's just so overwhelming." "I get it," he said, nodding. "It's a big decision. But you don't have to do it alone. The program has mentors and support groups. Plus, I'll be there to help guide you. You've got this, Sarah." For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Real, tangible hope. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't naive. It would be hard, especially balancing everything with her current life. But it was an opportunity, and opportunities like this didn't come around every day. "You're right," she said slowly, a newfound determination creeping into her voice. "Maybe it's time to take a chance." Mr. Harper smiled, his eyes filled with encouragement. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I know it's scary, but you can do it. I'll help you however I can." Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but she was ready to take the first step. "Okay," she said. "Let's do this. Where do I sign up?" Mr. Harper's smile widened. "I'll get the paperwork to you. I'll walk you through everything. And remember, you've got me in your corner." As they exchanged a few more words, Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The uncertainty that had clouded her future seemed a little clearer now. This wasn't just a chance to return to school, it was a chance to rebuild her life, to reclaim the woman she had once been, and to show everyone, and herself, that she was more than the woman who swept floors. As Sarah walked away from the conversation, her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. But one thing was certain: she was ready to begin this new chapter, no matter what it took. It had been a few days since Sarah had talked to Mr. Harper, and the more she thought about the opportunity he had offered, the more she felt a sense of urgency creeping into her chest. The idea of returning to school, of pursuing a degree, of reclaiming the future she had once dreamed of, it was all becoming more real with each passing hour. But reality wasn't as simple as a decision. She had responsibilities, commitments that didn't disappear just because she had a spark of hope. The laundry needed to be done. Her mother's bills had to be paid. Her job at the school, as monotonous as it sometimes felt, was a steady paycheck that kept the lights on. Could she really put all of that at risk for something as uncertain as school? Could she gamble with the stability she had worked so hard to create? The more Sarah thought about it, the more the doubt crept back in. What if I can't handle it? What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? The questions swirled in her mind, drowning out the glimmer of excitement she had felt when Mr. Harper first told her about the program. But deep down, Sarah knew that fear was normal. Fear was always the shadow that trailed behind new opportunities. It was the weight you carried when you dared to change. That evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee and staring at the papers Mr. Harper had given her, she couldn't help but think about the years that had passed. It had been so long since she had dreamed of doing something like this. Back in college, she had been a force to be reckoned with, sharp, driven, and passionate about math. But life had taken her down a different road. She hadn't expected to end up as a janitor. But then again, whoever really expected their life to turn out the way it did? Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Linda, her best friend. Linda had always been her rock, the one person who believed in her when no one else did. "Hey, sis. You good? Haven't heard from you in a while. Let's catch up. Maybe grab some coffee." Sarah smiled to herself. Linda had always known how to cut through her worries and remind her that life was meant to be lived, not feared. Sarah's fingers hovered over the phone screen for a moment before she typed back. "Actually, I've got something to tell you. Coffee sounds good. Tomorrow?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course. I'm free at noon. Tell me everything." The next day, Sarah met Linda at a small cafe just off the main street. It was a cozy place with mismatched furniture, the kind of cafe where people came for the atmosphere just as much as for the coffee. Sarah hadn't been there in ages, but today, it felt like the perfect place to open up and share her news. Linda was already sitting at a table by the window, her curly hair bouncing as she laughed at something on her phone. When she saw Sarah approaching, her face lit up, and she waved her over excitedly. "Sarah! You're here. Finally." Linda gave her a big hug as Sarah sat down across from her. "Sorry I'm late," Sarah said with a grin, feeling a bit lighter as she settled into the chair. "Don't worry about it. Now, spill. What's going on? You've been awfully quiet lately." Sarah took a deep breath, the excitement and anxiety still swirling inside her. "I've been thinking a lot, about my future. About going back to school." Linda raised an eyebrow. "School? Sarah, you're already working full-time. You're taking care of your mom. What are you talking about?" "I know," Sarah replied, her voice low. "But Mr. Harper, the math teacher at the high school. He told me about a program. It's for adults who want to finish their degrees. He's been mentoring people through it, and he thinks I could do it. He gave me the information, and I've been thinking about it ever since." Linda's eyes widened in surprise. Wait. You're seriously considering going back to school? After all these years?" Sarah nodded, the words spilling out faster now. "I can't stop thinking about it, Linda. I've always wanted to finish my degree, but life got in the way. I've been cleaning classrooms, doing the same thing every day. But I miss math. I miss solving problems. I miss feeling like I had a purpose, you know. Linda leaned forward, her face softening. Sarah, I think that's amazing. But, she paused, looking at her friend seriously. You know how hard it's going to be, right? You're not just going to walk into class and breeze through this. It's going to take a lot of work. And you're already juggling a lot with your mom and your job. Have you really thought this through? Sarah nodded slowly. I have. I know it won't be easy, but I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering what if. I want to try. I want to see what I'm capable of. Linda's eyes softened, and for a moment, she was silent. Then she reached across the table and took Sarah's hand in hers. You've always been capable, Sarah, she said quietly. I've always believed in you. You're the smartest person I know. If anyone can do this, it's you. A lump formed in Sarah's throat, and she blinked back tears. It was the first time in a long time that someone had told her she was capable, truly capable. It made the weight of the decision seem a little lighter. I've been so scared, Sarah admitted. What if I fail? What if I can't handle it? Linda squeezed her hand. What if you don't fail? What if this is your chance to do something amazing? If you don't take the leap, you'll never know. But I know you, Sarah. I know you have the strength to do this. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over her. Linda's words had always had a way of cutting through the noise in her head. And today, they were exactly what she needed to hear. I think you're right, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. I can do this. I've got to at least try. Linda smiled, her eyes shining with pride. You've got this, girl. And I'll be here, cheering you on every step of the way. The two of them spent the rest of the afternoon talking about everything, catching up on life, remembering old times, and making plans for the future. But for Sarah, the most important conversation had already happened. She had made the decision to take the leap, to pursue her dreams, and to reclaim the life she had once dreamed of. Later that evening, Sarah sat down at her kitchen table once more, the program information in front of her. With a deep breath, she picked up the pen and filled out the first form. This was it. She was ready to begin. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah had filled out the application forms for the community outreach program, gathered the necessary documents, and submitted everything with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. But that was only the beginning. Now, she had to wait. And waiting, for Sarah, was often the hardest part. Every morning, after she finished her shift cleaning the classrooms, she would check her phone, hoping for an email, a message, anything to confirm that she was accepted into the program. Each time, her heart would race when she saw the notification, only for it to be a reminder for work, or a message from her mom. She found herself growing restless, pacing around her small apartment, reorganizing her kitchen cabinets, doing anything to distract herself from the constant weight of uncertainty. There were days when it felt like the dream she was chasing might slip through her fingers before it even truly began. The night before the acceptance letters were supposed to arrive, Sarah barely slept. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made the right choice. What if it was too much? What if she couldn't handle the stress of school and work and everything else? What if I fail? But as the hours passed, and the weight of those thoughts grew heavier, something inside Sarah pushed back against the fear. She had spent too many years settling for less than what she deserved. The possibility of failing didn't scare her as much as the thought of never trying at all. The next morning, when she finally dragged herself out of bed, it was the first thing she did, check her phone. One new message, Sarah. Congratulations. You've been accepted to the spring semester of our adult education program. We look forward to seeing you in class. Her hands shook as she read the message, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't quite believe it. She had been accepted. She was going back to school. The confirmation was like a spark, igniting the fire she had tried to keep hidden for so long. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, staring at her phone screen, her mind reeling. It was real. She was going to school. She was going to finally do something for herself. She couldn't help it, she laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief that echoed through her small apartment. For a few moments, she stood there, feeling like the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She had done it. "Okay, Sarah. Let's do this," she whispered to herself. The next few days were filled with preparations. She bought notebooks, pens, and a backpack, simple things that felt like a significant step toward reclaiming her future. She even went to the local bookstore to pick up a couple of math books, just to brush up on the basics. It felt strange to hold the books in her hands again, but in a good way. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of anticipation about learning. On the first day of class, Sarah stood in front of the university building, her stomach a mixture of excitement and dread. She had been here once before, in another life, when she was a young woman full of hope and ambition. Back then, she had been surrounded by people her own age, but now, walking into this building as an adult with responsibilities, the experience felt vastly different. She wasn't sure what to expect or how she would fit in with the younger students. Would they see her as out of place? Would they judge her for being older? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Linda. "Hey, girl, you got this. I'm so proud of you. Take a deep breath and show them what you're made of. I'll be cheering you on." With a smile, Sarah put the phone back in her pocket. She had to admit, the support from Linda, and from Mr. Harper, who had guided her through the whole process, meant more to her than she had anticipated. They believed in her, and that belief was starting to become contagious. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the doors of the building. The hallway was filled with students, some walking confidently, others looking nervous like her. She walked to the designated room, her palms slightly sweaty, but her determination growing stronger with each step. The classroom was just as she remembered, bright, clean, and filled with the buzz of nervous energy that came with the start of a new semester. A few of the students glanced up as she entered, but most were engrossed in their own conversations or looking at their phones. Sarah found an empty seat near the back and sat down, setting her things on the desk in front of her. She tried to focus on the syllabus, reading through the material that she would be covering in the coming months, but her mind kept wandering. What if they think I don't belong here? What if I'm too old for this? A voice broke through her anxious thoughts. "Hi, is this seat taken?" Sarah looked up and saw a young woman standing next to her, holding a stack of books. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair and an approachable smile. Sarah shook her head, smiling nervously. "No, it's open," Sarah replied, gesturing for the woman to sit. The young woman nodded and took the seat next to Sarah, placing her books on the desk. "I'm Jasmine," she said, extending a hand. "I'm in the same class. First time back in school." Sarah hesitated for a moment but then smiled. "Yeah, it's been a long time." "I can imagine," Jasmine said with a warm smile. "I'm a bit nervous myself, to be honest. I'm glad we're in this together, though." Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in feeling nervous. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be so bad. The professor walked into the room just then, a middle-aged man with glasses and a friendly demeanor. "All right, everyone, let's get started," he said, setting his papers down on the desk. "I'm Professor Andrews. I'll be your instructor for this semester. Let's start by going over the course outline." As he spoke, Sarah felt a growing sense of anticipation. The nerves were still there, but they weren't as overwhelming as before. There was a spark inside her, a quiet confidence that told her she had made the right choice. This was her chance to build something new, something she could be proud of. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The first week of classes flew by in a whirlwind of new faces, overwhelming syllabi, and the familiar hum of old nerves that Sarah had long buried beneath years of routine. Every morning, she woke up early, packed her lunch, and made her way to class. It felt surreal to be walking these halls again, but this time, it was different. This time, she was determined. However, the reality of being an older student in a classroom full of younger peers was starting to hit her. She felt the weight of her life experiences bearing down on her as she sat in those desks, surrounded by people who had not yet seen the challenges she had. The age gap, while not huge, was noticeable. Some of the students whispered to each other, glancing at her when they thought she wasn't looking. She tried not to let it bother her, but it was hard not to notice the occasional look of surprise when she introduced herself. Professor Andrews was a kind and patient teacher, but the material, calculus, algebra, statistics, was a beast of its own. The equations and formulas seemed to swirl before her eyes, each one more complicated than the last. It had been years since Sarah had tackled math like this. Back when she was in school, she had been sharp, one of the best in the class. But now, sitting in the classroom, she felt a rising tide of doubt. What if I'm not as good as I used to be? What if I can't keep up? The doubts were relentless. She could see the younger students breezing through the material while she struggled to even understand the basics. In one of her calculus classes, the professor had asked the students to solve an equation on the board. Sarah, though she had been trying her best, found herself frozen in place, unable to remember the steps. Her mind blanked. One of the students, a young man named Ethan, noticed and quickly volunteered to go up and solve the equation for her. He was a typical college student, confident and articulate, and it felt like he barely glanced at the problem before he solved it. Sarah sat there, feeling embarrassed, her heart pounding as the class watched. It wasn't that she didn't know how to do the math, it was that she had become so out of practice that the simplest things now seemed like insurmountable mountains. After the class ended, Sarah stayed behind to gather her things. As she reached for her bag, Ethan approached her, his smile warm. "Hey, don't worry about it," he said, offering a sympathetic glance. "We all struggle with this stuff at first. It just takes time to get back into the swing of things." Sarah forced a smile, trying to mask her frustration. "Thanks. I'm just not sure I'm cut out for this anymore." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You've been in this class for only a week. Give it time, you'll get the hang of it." "Yeah," Sarah muttered, but the doubts continued to gnaw at her. "I hope so." She left the classroom, the weight of failure heavy on her shoulders. But as she walked through the campus, something inside her shifted. She had faced hard times before, times when life had seemed impossible, when it felt like everything was stacked against her. Yet she had kept going, one day at a time. Why should this be any different? When Sarah returned to her apartment, she was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Her head ached from the constant strain of trying to absorb new information, and her body felt worn from the long days of balancing work, study, and everything else. Sitting down at her kitchen table, she opened her math textbook and stared at the first chapter again. The numbers and formulas blurred before her eyes. But instead of giving up, something inside her sparked, a quiet, determined voice that reminded her of who she used to be. A woman who didn't back down. A woman who had once been unstoppable. "I can do this. I've faced worse." For the next few hours, Sarah went through the textbook. Slowly, painstakingly, she started to break down the concepts. She didn't have the luxury of long study sessions, her job still needed her, and her responsibilities at home didn't stop, but she was determined to make progress, however small. It wasn't easy. There were times when she felt like giving up. When the equations just didn't make sense. When the fear of failure threatened to overwhelm her. But every time she felt like she was about to quit, she thought of her mother, who had always told her to keep going no matter how hard life got. She thought of Linda, who had always been her biggest supporter, even when Sarah had doubted herself. She thought of Mr. Harper, who had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. And so, she kept going. Slowly, the fog began to clear. The numbers didn't seem so intimidating. The formulas began to make sense, one step at a time. A few days later, when Sarah walked into her next math class, she felt a little more confident. It wasn't that she had mastered everything overnight, but she had done enough to give herself a fighting chance. When Professor Andrews asked for a volunteer to solve an equation on the board, Sarah hesitated. But this time, instead of waiting for someone else to jump in, she raised her hand. Her heart raced as she stood up, her palms sweaty, but as she walked to the front of the class, she focused on the steps. The numbers on the board seemed less daunting than they had before. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote the first equation, but she kept going, step by step. To her surprise, she solved the equation correctly. A wave of relief and pride washed over her as she stepped back from the board. The class applauded, and even Professor Andrews gave her an approving nod. "Well done, Sarah," he said with a smile. As she returned to her seat, Sarah felt a rush of warmth spread through her chest. She had done it. She had faced the fear, the doubt, and the uncertainty, and she had succeeded. It wasn't perfect. She wasn't perfect. But she had taken a step forward. And that, Sarah realized, was enough. The days following her small victory in class were a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into her studies with an intensity she hadn't known she still had. Each morning, she woke up earlier, spending an extra half-hour reviewing notes before she even stepped into the shower. At work, she started taking mental breaks. When she had a moment to herself in the broom closet or while folding towels in the storage room, she'd pull out her notes and try to reinforce what she'd learned in class. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was truly alive. There was a spark in her that she had thought had long since faded, a fire rekindled by the challenge of returning to school. But it was not just the math that fueled her determination, it was the feeling of possibility, the idea that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't too old to make something of herself. However, with each small victory, new challenges arose. The first was time. Between her job, her classes, and her responsibilities at home, Sarah was constantly juggling. Her evenings were spent reading through equations and solving problems, and even on weekends, she didn't get much time to relax. The demands of being a student again, on top of everything else, sometimes felt like too much. But Sarah was stubborn, and she refused to let herself fall behind. If there was one thing life had taught her, it was how to manage, how to survive when things seemed impossible. So, she pushed on, albeit tired and a little frazzled at times. The second challenge was her classmates. Most of them were in their early 20s, fresh out of high school, and seemed to have no problem balancing their studies with the rest of their lives. Sarah couldn't help but feel like a fish out of water. At times, the generational divide between her and the younger students felt stark. They would chat about social media trends, weekend parties, and dating apps, things Sarah had long since stopped keeping up with. The discussion sometimes left her feeling out of place. But she was determined not to let that affect her. One day, as she sat in the back of the classroom, trying to focus on her notes, she overheard a conversation between two of her classmates, Megan and Jasmine, the same woman who had sat next to her on the first day. "Ugh, I can't believe we have another math assignment. This stuff is so confusing," Megan said, tapping her pencil against her notebook. "I'm so bad at it." Jasmine laughed softly, but there was a hint of concern in her voice. "It's really not that bad. We'll figure it out. If you need help, let me know." Sarah's heart gave a small leap. Maybe she wasn't the only one struggling. After class ended, Sarah lingered behind, collecting her things slowly. Jasmine, noticing her, walked over with a friendly smile. "Hey, Sarah. I saw you were doing great last week with that equation. How's it going this week?" Sarah smiled, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "It's going, okay. Just trying to keep up. You know, I've been thinking about it, Jasmine said, hesitating. I'm not really great at math either, and I noticed you're doing the same thing I do sometimes, kind of faking it. But hey, I bet we can help each other out. How about we study together? Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. It wasn't often people offered to study with her, especially someone so much younger. I'd really like that, she said, grateful for the kindness. They exchanged numbers, and for the next few days, Sarah found herself looking forward to their study sessions. Jasmine had a different approach to the material. She wasn't as concerned with getting every single answer correct, but rather understanding the process. Her calm, patient demeanor was a welcome change from Sarah's own hurried approach. As the study sessions continued, Sarah began to feel more confident in her abilities. Jasmine had a knack for explaining things in a way that made even the most complicated formulas seem simple. It was a slow process, but Sarah began to see patterns, to understand the logic behind the equations, rather than just memorizing steps. She still had a long way to go, but she was no longer overwhelmed. One afternoon, as they sat in the library poring over a particularly difficult calculus problem, Jasmine paused, looking at Sarah with an expression of surprise. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking, Jasmine said, tapping her pencil against her cheek. You really know your stuff. You might not think so, but you really do. I can tell you have a real gift for math. Sarah blinked, unsure if she'd heard her correctly. What? No. I mean, I'm just trying to catch up. I'm just like you, struggling. No, Jasmine insisted, shaking her head. You've got the mind for this. You're just rusty. I can see it in the way you approach problems. You're smart, Sarah. You're just not used to believing it yet. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She hadn't really allowed herself to believe she had any kind of gift for math. She had spent so many years convincing herself she was only capable of cleaning and basic tasks. The thought that Jasmine saw something in her that she hadn't even noticed herself was both humbling and overwhelming. But as the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to believe her friend. She started to see that she wasn't just trying to catch up. She was learning. She was growing. And it wasn't just the math. It was everything, the belief in herself, the courage to keep going, the small victories that added up over time. One morning, as Sarah walked into class, she was greeted by a surprising sight. Professor Andrews was standing at the front of the room, holding a piece of chalk. He looked at the class, then at Sarah. All right, class, he said, smiling. We're going to do something a little different today. Sarah, why don't you come up to the board and show us how to solve this problem? Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What? The room was suddenly very quiet. All eyes were on her. She looked at the equation. Her mind raced. The numbers swirled. But then, something shifted. She took a deep breath, just like Jasmine had taught her, and walked up to the board. The chalk felt cold in her hand, but her movements were steady as she began to work through the equation, piece by piece. When she finished, she turned to the class, her heart still racing, but a sense of pride filling her chest. The class remained silent for a moment, before a few students began clapping. Professor Andrews smiled proudly. Well done, Sarah, he said. You've come a long way. As she returned to her seat, Sarah felt a rush of warmth flood through her. She wasn't just keeping up anymore. She was excelling. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah truly believed she could do anything. The week seemed to stretch out in front of Sarah like an endless road. The constant juggling of work, school, and home life never seemed to let up. But something had changed. A shift, a newfound sense of purpose, had taken root inside her. Math, once her nemesis, was becoming less of a monster and more of a puzzle that she was slowly learning to solve. Her study sessions with Jasmine had become a constant in her routine, and each week, they chipped away at the mountain of calculus problems that had once seemed impossible. Jasmine's belief in her ability had planted a seed of confidence that Sarah had never thought possible. She was no longer just a woman trying to survive her classes, she was a student, a capable one, at that. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in the library going over the notes for her upcoming midterm, a new challenge appeared, one that was far more personal than anything she had faced in class. It was around 2 p.m. when she received a call from her son, David. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly answered, trying to sound calm. "Hey, Mom. How's it going?" David's voice was light, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath. "I'm doing all right, honey. How are you?" "I'm okay. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about." Sarah's heart sank. She had known this call was coming. David, at 19, had always been a little rebellious. Lately, though, he had been acting out more, skipping school, staying out late, getting into trouble with his friends. Sarah knew he was struggling, but she hadn't been able to figure out how to help him. He'd shut her out more and more in recent months, and it had broken her heart. "Mom," David continued, his voice shaky. I'm thinking about dropping out of school. I just don't see the point anymore. Everything's going wrong. I'm not good enough for this stuff." Sarah's breath hitched. She tried to steady her voice, but it cracked as she spoke. "David, no. You can't give up. This is your future. You've worked too hard to just throw it away. I know, but it's not working. I don't fit in there. I'm failing. No one seems to care." Sarah clenched her jaw, her mind racing. She understood his frustration. She had been there herself, many years ago, struggling to find her way. But hearing David speak like this brought back memories of her own past, of the fear she had felt before she decided to fight for her dreams. "David, I know it's tough right now. But we all go through hard times. You can't give up. Not on your future. Not on yourself." There was silence on the other end of the line, and Sarah could feel the weight of her words. She needed to say something more, something that would reach him. "You remember when I went back to school?" Sarah asked quietly. "How I felt like I was too old, like it was impossible. But I kept going. Even when it felt like I wasn't good enough. I kept pushing through because I believed that I could make something of myself, even if it took time." David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah held her breath, hoping he would hear her. "I'm just scared, Mom," he finally admitted. Sarah's heart ached as she spoke. "I know, honey. But you don't have to face it alone. You're not alone. I'll be here for you, no matter what. But you've got to keep going. Just like I am. Just like we both can." David sighed. "I don't know if I can do it, Mom." "You can. And if you need help, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time." There was a pause, and then David spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'll think about it, Mom. Thanks. Promise me you won't quit?" Sarah asked, her voice steady now, filled with a fierce protectiveness. "I promise," David said quietly. "Thanks, Mom. I love you. I love you too, David. Don't ever forget that." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. She wasn't sure if David would listen to her. She didn't know if he'd be able to turn things around. But she did know one thing, she couldn't give up on him. Not now. Not ever. The call had shaken her, but it also reminded her of why she was doing all this. Her journey wasn't just about her. It was about showing David, and herself, that it was never too late to change, never too late to fight for something better. If she could keep going, so could he. As the days passed, Sarah found herself thinking more about her own struggles. She had once been a woman with dreams, a woman who had wanted something more than just getting by. And now, as she sat in her math class, struggling through complex integrals and equations, she realized something profound: those dreams weren't gone. They were still there, waiting for her. And she was going to fight for them, no matter what. Her professor, Professor Andrews, continued to recognize her progress, and soon, the rest of the class started to take notice too. One afternoon, as she solved a particularly difficult problem in front of the class, he raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Very impressive, Sarah," he said with a nod of approval. "I must admit, you've come a long way since we started this course." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt her confidence growing. She wasn't just fighting for a passing grade. She was fighting for herself, for her future. And with each success, no matter how small, she was building something that she could be proud of. Later that week, Sarah received another call from David. This time, his voice was different, more determined, more sure of himself. "I signed up for tutoring," he said. "I'm not going to quit. I want to make it work. Thanks for believing in me, Mom." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened. She wasn't sure where this path would take them, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. As Sarah walked into class the following Monday, she felt a strange sense of optimism that had been absent just a few weeks ago. For the first time, the weight of the challenge ahead didn't feel as heavy. She had made progress, not just in her coursework, but in herself. Her confidence was growing with every passing day, and so was her resolve. She hadn't heard from David much since their conversation, but something in her gut told her that he was taking her words to heart. She hadn't expected an overnight transformation, but the fact that he'd signed up for tutoring meant something. It meant he was still trying, still reaching for something better. And that was more than she could have hoped for. The midterm was coming up in 2 weeks, and while Sarah still found the material challenging, she now had a different outlook. It wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about being the best. It was about understanding, about proving to herself that she had what it took to succeed. It was about showing her son, and the world, that no matter how old you were, no matter where you started, you could still learn, still grow, still fight for what mattered. Professor Andrews had been a great source of support for Sarah, though in his usual way, he didn't exactly make it easy. He didn't treat her any differently from the younger students, nor did he let her off the hook when it came to assignments and exams. But there was something about his approach, his high expectations, that pushed Sarah in a way no one else had. He didn't look at her and see a woman with a full-time job and a family. He saw a student. And that made her want to live up to the challenge. That Monday, after class, Sarah noticed something different. As she walked to her locker, she caught a glimpse of a familiar face. It was Megan, one of the more outspoken students in the class, chatting with a couple of friends. Megan had been one of the students who seemed to have it all: confidence, charm, and an easy grasp of the material. At first, Sarah had felt a pang of jealousy when she saw how effortlessly Megan grasped the concepts. But over the past few weeks, she had come to realize that Megan, despite her outward bravado, was struggling in her own way. Megan caught Sarah's eye as she approached. There was a brief moment of silence before Megan offered a smile and waved. "Hey, Sarah. Can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, her tone warmer than usual. Sarah paused, a little surprised. Megan was not someone who usually went out of her way to talk to her. She had always been friendly enough, but not exactly the type to form deep connections. Still, Sarah nodded and walked over. "Sure, what's up?" she asked, her voice tentative. Megan glanced over at her friends, who were talking animatedly, then turned her attention back to Sarah. "I just wanted to say, I've noticed how much you've been improving. Seriously. You've been doing awesome lately. I don't know if anyone's told you, but you've been killing it with the assignments. Like, way better than before." Sarah blinked, surprised by the compliment. She had noticed that her performance in class had improved, but hearing it from someone else, especially from someone like Megan, made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. Thanks, Sarah said, smiling softly. I've been trying my best. I can tell, Megan said, her expression sincere. Honestly, I've been struggling with this stuff. I'm really trying, but it's hard to wrap my head around some of these problems. Maybe we could study together sometime. I think it would help me. Sarah's heart gave a small leap. Megan wants to study with me. She had never thought of offering help to anyone else before, let alone someone like Megan. But there was something about Megan's vulnerability in that moment, her admission of struggle, that reminded Sarah of her own journey. I'd love to, Sarah said without hesitation. Maybe we can help each other. I know I've had my own struggles with it. Megan's eyes brightened. For sure. I think that would be great. I'm going to need all the help I can get before this midterm. The two exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet at the library later that week for a study session. Sarah left campus that afternoon with a smile on her face, her mind buzzing with the idea that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of more than she thought. As the days passed, Sarah continued to study with Jasmine, but now she also made time to meet with Megan. It was strange at first, feeling like the student was suddenly becoming the teacher. But as the sessions continued, Sarah began to realize how much she had learned. Explaining concepts to others forced her to clarify her own understanding, and in doing so, she was solidifying her grasp on the material. It was in one of these sessions that Sarah had a breakthrough moment. She and Megan were going over integration by parts, a concept that had initially baffled Sarah. As Megan struggled to understand the process, Sarah took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and explained it step by step, in a way that made sense to both of them. Okay, Megan said slowly, so it's like, we're breaking this thing down into parts, and then putting it all together again. Got it. Sarah smiled, proud of herself. Exactly. It's all about recognizing the pieces. Once you see how they fit together, it's not as hard. Megan's face lit up with understanding. Wow, that makes so much sense. Thanks, Sarah. Seriously, I think I'm finally starting to get it. For the first time, Sarah realized that teaching had its own rewards. It wasn't just about passing the class for herself anymore, it was about helping others, making a difference in ways she hadn't anticipated. And in that moment, she understood something deeply important: the more she helped others, the more she helped herself. When the midterm arrived, Sarah walked into the classroom feeling a little nervous but also more confident than she had ever been. She knew the material. She had studied. And she had worked hard, not just for a grade, but for something deeper, the belief in herself. The belief that she could do this. As Professor Andrews handed out the exam, Sarah took a deep breath and dove in, solving each problem one by one. There were moments of doubt, but she kept pushing forward, trusting the process. She had come so far, there was no turning back now. When the exam was over and Sarah handed in her paper, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. No matter what the grade was, she knew she had given it her all. And that, she realized, was what truly mattered. The morning of the midterm, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. It was still dark outside, the sky a deep blue-gray, but the faint light of the dawn was beginning to stretch across the horizon. She could feel her heart beat faster than normal, a mixture of anticipation and nerves settling in her chest. This was it. The moment that would determine whether all her hard work, all those late nights in the library and hours spent going over formulas, would pay off. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her eyes had the familiar tired look of someone who had been burning the candle at both ends. But there was something different in her gaze, something steadier. She had come a long way, not just in terms of her understanding of calculus, but in her belief in herself. There was no turning back now. She ran a hand over her face and whispered softly to herself, "I've got this." At the kitchen table, Sarah made herself a quick breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal and some coffee. Her mind was racing, going over the key concepts and equations she had drilled into her memory. She reminded herself to take things one step at a time. The first problem on the test would be just like the practice ones. And the next one. And the next. She just had to breathe, stay calm, and do her best. She glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. It was time to leave. As she grabbed her bag, she gave a quick kiss to her daughter, Leah, who was still groggy, lying in bed. "You've got this, Mom," Leah said, her voice muffled by the blanket. "I know," Sarah replied with a smile, feeling a surge of gratitude for her daughter's unspoken support. When Sarah arrived at the classroom, she could see the same nervous energy buzzing in the air. Students were milling around, some quietly chatting, others pacing back and forth. The professor's assistants were setting up the exam papers on the front desk, preparing the room for what was to come. Sarah took her usual seat in the back, breathing deeply and focusing on calming her nerves. She had studied as much as she could. Now, it was time to trust herself. She reached into her bag for a pen and notebook, writing a few calming words. "Breathe. You are ready." Professor Andrews entered the room just as the clock struck 8 o'clock. There was a palpable hush as he began passing out the exam papers. Sarah could feel her stomach flip, but she did her best to ignore it, keeping her eyes on the paper in front of her. She scanned the instructions and then, slowly, began reading the first question. Integrate the following function. It was a question on integration by parts. Sarah's heart steadied as she saw it. She had worked on problems just like this. She felt her mind engage, focusing on the method, the steps. The first part came easily, and she smiled to herself, a small, quiet victory. She continued through the exam, the problems getting progressively harder, but each one felt familiar. She tackled them methodically, breaking down the equations into pieces, just like she had practiced. Her confidence continued to build with every answer she solved. Her hand moved across the paper with a fluidity she hadn't thought possible. She didn't second-guess herself. She simply worked, her focus narrowing, shutting out the world around her. But then, a sudden jolt of panic washed over her as she reached the last problem. It was a tricky one that involved both integration and differentiation, with several variables to work through. Sarah blinked at the question, her mind momentarily blank. It was more complicated than anything she had done in practice. The clock was ticking down, and the room was filled with the rustling of papers and the occasional cough. Her heart rate quickened. Focus. Just breathe, she reminded herself. She flipped through her notebook, looking for any scribbled notes that might help. Her hands were starting to shake as she found the formula she needed. But the question seemed to twist and turn, the variables coming at her from all directions. She had no idea how to start solving it. A knot of frustration tightened in her chest. "It's okay," Sarah told herself, gritting her teeth. "You've handled harder things. Just break it down." Her mind raced back to the study sessions, remembering how she had taken a complex problem and broken it down into simpler parts. She could do that now. She took a deep breath, focused her attention on the first part of the equation, and slowly began to apply the method. Minutes passed. She wrote, erased, recalculated. Her head spun, but she kept working, pushing herself through the confusion, through the rising doubt. Finally, she wrote down her final answer and looked at the clock, 9:58 a.m. With only 2 minutes left, she put her pen down, feeling a heavy sense of relief. It was over. The exam was handed in, and Sarah sat back in her chair, exhausted. She didn't know for sure if she had gotten every question right, but she knew she had done everything she could. She had stayed calm, stayed focused, and given her best effort. That was all she could ask of herself. As the students filed out of the room, Sarah gathered her things and walked toward the door. She paused for a moment to take in the quiet hallways, her nerves slowly unwinding. The weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for the past few weeks began to lift, and she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. When she reached the parking lot, she got into her car and took a deep breath, allowing herself a moment to just relax. As she turned the key in the ignition, she thought of David. How he had been struggling with school, how she had helped him see that he wasn't alone. She thought of her daughter, Leah, and how proud she was of both of them. And she thought about herself, about how far she had come, how much she had learned, and how she had proven to herself that it was never too late to take control of your future. That night, Sarah sat down with her family for dinner. They chatted about their day, about school and work, and even though she couldn't shake the nervousness over her exam results, there was an unspoken sense of accomplishment in the air. She had done it. She had faced the challenge head-on and had come out the other side, still standing. After dinner, she sat down on the couch and opened her laptop to check her email. There was a notification from Professor Andrews. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. Dear Sarah, I wanted to personally commend you for your performance on the midterm. Your improvement over the course of the semester has been remarkable, and I was impressed by the way you handled even the most challenging problems. You've shown a great deal of dedication and perseverance, and I look forward to seeing how you continue to grow in the second half of the course. Sincerely, Professor Andrews. Sarah sat back, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't a perfect score, but it was a win. She had made it through, and now, more than ever, she knew she could do anything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah hadn't heard the word impressive used to describe her work in a long time. The email from Professor Andrews still sat open on her laptop screen, a tangible reminder that all her late nights, all the hours spent poring over textbooks and notes, had paid off. She leaned back in her chair, letting the reality of it sink in. She had worked hard, yes, but it was something else, too. It was more than just getting the right answers, it was the confidence that came from knowing she could push through, from seeing herself evolve into someone capable of tackling challenges head-on. The week following the midterm was a blur of activity. Sarah's days were a whirlwind of cleaning, taking care of Leah, working on assignments, and meeting with David for tutoring sessions. Yet, there was a sense of calm about her now. The constant feeling of being overwhelmed was slowly ebbing away. She no longer felt like she was drowning in responsibilities. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of exhaustion and frustration, but she had a clear sense of direction, a sense that the pieces were finally beginning to fall into place. One evening, after dinner, Sarah was sitting in the living room with her laptop open, preparing to work on a set of problems for the next module in class. Leah was finishing her homework at the kitchen table, her concentration furrowed, pencil tapping the page in a rhythmic pattern. Sarah glanced over at her daughter, who caught her eye and smiled. "Mom, you're doing really well in that math class, aren't you?" Leah asked, her voice curious but full of admiration. Sarah smiled, nodding as she adjusted her glasses. "I guess so. I'm working hard, that's for sure." Leah tilted her head, as if she were thinking about something. "Do you think I could learn calculus too? I mean, if you can do it, I should be able to, right?" Sarah chuckled softly at the idea. "I'm not sure if you're ready for calculus just yet, honey, but when the time comes, we'll tackle it together. I'll be right here to help you." Leah's eyes shone with a mixture of excitement and pride. "I think you're going to do awesome." "You already are." Sarah's heart swelled. Her daughter's unwavering belief in her gave her strength in ways she couldn't fully describe. It was moments like this that made all the effort, all the sleepless nights, worth it. It wasn't just about passing the class anymore. It was about being a role model, showing Leah that there was no obstacle too big if you worked hard enough. A few days later, Sarah was sitting in the student lounge after class, waiting for David to arrive for their tutoring session. The room was bustling with students, most of them lost in their phones or buried in books. It was here, in the sea of young faces, that Sarah felt most out of place, older, more experienced, with a life that had already been lived. But at the same time, she didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She had found her rhythm, her place in this world of academia, even if it wasn't where she had started. David walked in, his face flushed from the cold, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked around for a moment, and when his eyes found Sarah's, he gave her a smile. It was the first time in a while that it wasn't strained or apologetic. It was genuine. "Hey," he said, dropping his bag onto the table. "Ready to get back at it?" Sarah returned his smile, feeling a sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. "You bet. We've got this." They sat down, pulling out their books and notes. David had been struggling with the same concepts Sarah had once found confusing, but over the past few weeks, she had seen him slowly begin to grasp them. There was something incredibly satisfying about watching him have those aha moments, those sparks of realization that made everything click into place. It reminded her of when she first started to understand calculus, not all at once, but bit by bit, like piecing together a puzzle. "Okay," Sarah began, flipping open her textbook, "let's go over the chain rule one more time. It's a tough one, but once you get it, you're set." David nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. As Sarah started to explain the concept again, she found herself simplifying it in a way that made it clearer not only for David but for herself as well. The more she explained, the more she realized how much she had learned, not just about math, but about teaching, about being patient and persistent. It was one thing to understand a concept, but it was another to break it down so that someone else could understand it too. As the session went on, Sarah felt the rhythm of their work flow more smoothly. David was starting to pick up the pace. He was more confident, less hesitant to ask questions when something didn't make sense. And Sarah could see the shift in him, he was starting to believe in his own ability. "So, you're getting the hang of this?" she asked, her voice light, but there was a note of pride in her tone. David looked up at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I think I am. Honestly, I'm surprised I'm doing this well. I mean, I was really lost at first. But I think I've got it now. I think I can do this." Sarah's heart swelled with a quiet pride. "You've always been capable, David. You just needed the right kind of support. I'm glad to be part of your journey." David looked at her, a sense of gratitude in his eyes. "I don't think I would have gotten this far without you. Seriously. Thanks for sticking with me." The two of them sat there for a few moments, the noise of the lounge fading into the background. Sarah couldn't help but feel that this was one of those moments that defined who she had become. It wasn't just about the grades, or even the classes, it was about the people she was helping, the lives she was touching. It was about the change she was making in her own life, and in the lives of others. As they packed up their things and said their goodbyes, David gave her one last grateful look. "I'll see you next time." "Thanks again, Sarah." "Really?" "Anytime, David," Sarah replied, smiling as she walked out of the lounge. The cold winter air hit her face as she stepped outside, but she didn't mind. The chill was a reminder that despite the obstacles she had faced, she had kept going. And no matter what the future held, she was ready for it. The next few weeks went by in a blur. Sarah's confidence continued to grow with every passing day, and with it, her understanding of not just calculus but herself. Each new lesson was an opportunity for growth, both academically and personally. She found herself teaching and learning in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her relationship with David was no longer just that of a tutor and a student, they were collaborators, partners in the shared journey of learning. And she couldn't help but feel proud of the progress they had both made. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Professor Andrews. "Sarah, could you come by my office tomorrow? I'd like to discuss your progress." The words, "discuss your progress," sent a ripple of nervousness through her. She hadn't expected to hear from him. Was this about her midterm performance? Maybe there was something she had missed, something she hadn't done quite right. Her mind raced with questions and doubts. She sat down in the small corner of her apartment where she did most of her studying, staring at her phone for a few moments. A part of her wanted to overthink, to spiral into anxiety, but she caught herself. No. Not this time. She had worked too hard to let a little doubt throw her off course. You've got this, she reminded herself. She took a deep breath, set her phone down, and refocused her attention on the calculus problems in front of her. She could worry about tomorrow when it came. The next day, Sarah walked to Professor Andrews' office. As she passed through the halls of the building, the usual college atmosphere surrounded her, students chatting, professors rushing to meetings, and the hum of activity that always made her feel like she was in the middle of something much bigger than herself. It was a strange feeling, both exhilarating and overwhelming. When she reached his office, she knocked lightly on the door. "Come in." Professor Andrews' voice called from the other side. Sarah opened the door and stepped in. The office was small but tidy, papers neatly stacked on one side of the desk, bookshelves lined with textbooks and journals on the other. Professor Andrews was sitting at his desk, wearing his usual cardigan and glasses. He looked up from his computer as she entered. "Ah, Sarah. Glad you could make it. Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Sarah sat down, her hands folding nervously in her lap. "Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't sure why you asked me to come by." Professor Andrews smiled warmly, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "Nothing to worry about. I just wanted to talk about your progress, as I mentioned in my message. First of all, I have to say I'm impressed by your performance on the midterm. You've really come a long way since the beginning of the semester." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You mean it?" "Absolutely. I've noticed the effort you've put into your work, and it's really starting to show. You've become more confident, more analytical in your approach to the material. Your exam score was very solid, but more importantly, you've been engaged in class. You ask thoughtful questions, and your answers are becoming more nuanced. I think you're ready for something more." Sarah's stomach fluttered with a mixture of relief and pride. She had worked so hard for this. She wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. She had always been so focused on proving herself that it was hard to accept compliments, especially when they came from someone she respected so much. Professor Andrews continued, "I believe you have the potential to do something special in this course, Sarah. You've got the ability, and I think you're ready to take on a research project. I'd like to offer you the opportunity to work on an independent project with me, something that pushes your boundaries and allows you to explore the material in a deeper, more meaningful way." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. A research project? She had never even considered that possibility before. The idea of working alongside a professor, contributing to real academic work, it seemed surreal. She had only just begun to believe in her own ability to succeed in calculus, and now this? She took a deep breath and asked, "What kind of project are you thinking of?" "I'm currently working on a study that involves applying calculus to real-world problems, specifically in the field of economics. The project would involve some theoretical modeling, as well as practical data analysis. I think it would be an excellent opportunity for you to really delve into the subject and contribute something meaningful." Sarah felt a rush of excitement mixed with anxiety. Economics. Real-world problems. This was a step into a world she hadn't even imagined before. But she could do it. She knew she could. "I'd love to do it," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. "Thank you for the opportunity." Professor Andrews smiled again, a satisfied look crossing his face. "I thought you might say that. I'll send you the details of the project over email, and we can meet later this week to discuss the timeline and expectations. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do." As Sarah left the office, she felt a sense of awe wash over her. A research project. She was going to be part of something bigger, something that would stretch her abilities and push her beyond the classroom. It was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of, but never thought she'd get. And here it was, in front of her. Later that evening, Sarah sat on the couch, her laptop open in front of her. The project proposal from Professor Andrews had arrived in her inbox. She skimmed through the details, her heart racing as she read about the complex models she would need to understand, the data sets she would need to analyze. It was daunting, but for the first time in her life, Sarah didn't shy away from something because it seemed too difficult. She was ready. She glanced over at Leah, who was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling in a notebook. Leah had always been Sarah's source of strength, a reminder of why she was pushing so hard. And now, Leah was watching her, perhaps in the same way Sarah had once watched others. Maybe one day, Leah would take on a challenge like this, too. For now, though, Sarah had her own journey to focus on. The road ahead was uncertain, but she felt more confident than ever that she was on the right path. She wasn't just a woman with a broom and a dustpan anymore. She wasn't just a mother or a tutor. She was someone who could take on the world. One calculus problem at a time. The days following Sarah's meeting with Professor Andrews were filled with a flurry of excitement and anticipation. As she read through the research proposal he had sent her, she felt both the weight of the task ahead and a spark of enthusiasm. This project was no small feat, it was a deep dive into calculus applied to economic theory, a topic she had only brushed against in her coursework. But there was something invigorating about the challenge. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something she could shape with her own hands. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when Sarah found herself sitting at her kitchen table, her laptop open, the project proposal displayed on the screen. The sunlight streamed in through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Leah was at the table too, working on her own homework. Sarah had told her about the project, though she hadn't yet fully explained its scope. It was one of those things that seemed so surreal that she didn't quite know how to put it into words. Leah glanced up from her worksheet. "Are you nervous, Mom?" she asked, her voice soft but inquisitive. Sarah blinked, startled by the question. She hadn't even realized how much her daughter had been paying attention to her. "I don't know," Sarah said, pausing for a moment as she considered her answer. "I guess I'm a little nervous, but it's also exciting. It's something I've never done before, but that's part of the fun, right?" Leah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're really good at this stuff. I know you'll do great." Sarah smiled at her daughter's words, feeling a warm sense of gratitude. Leah had always been her biggest supporter, even when Sarah had doubts about herself. It was moments like this, moments when her daughter's belief in her was unwavering, that made all the hard work feel worth it. "Thanks, honey," Sarah said, reaching over to give Leah's hand a quick squeeze before returning her attention to the project on her laptop. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into the research. She spent hours poring over textbooks, academic papers, and online resources. She was determined to understand the calculus models that Professor Andrews had suggested, and she quickly realized that the mathematics involved were more complex than anything she had encountered in her previous studies. It was daunting at first, and more than once, Sarah had to pause and take a deep breath, feeling a wave of frustration crash over her. But each time she faltered, she reminded herself of how far she had come, from the woman who had never even considered going to college, to the student now tackling graduate-level material. The struggles weren't unfamiliar. She had learned to persist through adversity in the past, and this time would be no different. By the end of the week, she had completed the preliminary models for the research project, and though they weren't perfect, they represented a significant step forward. She was proud of herself, not just for finishing the work, but for pushing through the doubts that had plagued her at the beginning. The project was hard, yes, but it was also rewarding. Every breakthrough, every tiny discovery, felt like a personal victory. One evening, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers lightly tapping against the edge of her laptop, Leah walked over, a pile of homework in her arms. She set it down on the table with a dramatic sigh. Mom, Leah said, dragging out the word, I've been working on this history project for hours, and I still don't get it. Do you ever get frustrated when you can't figure something out? Sarah smiled at her daughter, feeling a sense of kinship with the girl who had come to her for help, just as Sarah had once turned to others when she was stuck. All the time, sweetheart, Sarah said, her voice warm and reassuring. But the key is not to give up. You have to keep pushing, even when it feels like you're not getting anywhere. That's how you make progress. That's how you learn. Leah raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Even if you're stuck for hours? Sarah nodded, leaning back in her chair. Especially when you're stuck for hours. You don't give up. You step back, take a break, and come back to it with fresh eyes. And remember, you're not alone in this. If you need help, I'm here. Leah grinned. Thanks, Mom. I'll keep going. Sarah's heart swelled with pride as she watched her daughter sit back down, determination flashing in her eyes. This was more than just helping with a history project. It was about teaching Leah the value of persistence, the importance of not backing down when things got tough. It was about showing her that setbacks weren't failures, they were just part of the process. As Leah worked on her project, Sarah returned to her own work. The research project was beginning to come together, and she could see the outlines of her conclusions taking shape. It wasn't easy, but it was beginning to feel like it was all worth it. The following week, Sarah met with Professor Andrews again to discuss her progress. As she walked into his office, she felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She had worked hard, but she wasn't sure how her work would be received. Professor Andrews greeted her warmly as always, motioning for her to sit down. Good to see you, Sarah. How have things been going with the project? Sarah gave a nervous smile, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It's been a challenge, but I think I'm making progress. I've put together the initial models, but I'm not entirely sure if they're right. It's been a bit tricky. Professor Andrews leaned back in his chair, his hands folded across his chest. That's completely normal, Sarah. You're doing well. In fact, I've looked over your models, and I can already see some areas where you're really starting to get the hang of it. You've done well to integrate the calculus with the economic theory. I think you're on the right track. Sarah's heart lifted at his words. Really? I was worried I might have misunderstood some of the concepts. No, not at all. You've got the right approach. I think with a bit more refining, you'll have a solid foundation to move forward with. Sarah felt a surge of relief. This was it, the moment she had been working toward. The moment she realized that she had the ability to succeed at this level, to contribute something meaningful to the academic world. It wasn't just about getting through the course anymore. It was about taking what she had learned and applying it in a way that had real-world implications. Professor Andrews continued, I'm impressed by how far you've come, Sarah. Keep up the good work. You're on the right path. Sarah left the meeting with a sense of pride, her steps lighter than they had been when she entered. This was just the beginning. The work wasn't finished, but she had taken the first real step into uncharted territory. And for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she truly belonged here, among these students, these intellectuals, and in the world of mathematics she had come to love. The weeks following Sarah's meeting with Professor Andrews felt like a whirlwind. The initial sense of excitement and possibility had settled into a steady rhythm of hard work and determination. Sarah was making strides on her project, slowly but surely, though she hadn't yet reached the level of perfection she knew she needed. She was constantly revising her models, plugging away at data analysis, and refining her understanding of economic theories. It wasn't easy, but she was used to pushing through obstacles by now. The research had become an obsession, a challenge she couldn't walk away from. Despite the progress, Sarah couldn't shake a feeling of exhaustion that seemed to shadow her every step. She was juggling so many things, her work as a janitor, her responsibilities as a mother, her tutoring sessions with David, and now, her academic research. Every day was a balancing act, and it was beginning to take a toll. One late evening, Sarah found herself sitting at her kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop screen. Her eyes burned from the long hours of staring at the numbers and equations. She had been at it for hours, but she still couldn't crack a particular part of her project. It was like a wall she couldn't climb over, a concept she couldn't quite grasp. And the more she stared at it, the more frustrated she became. She rubbed her temples, trying to stave off the headache that was beginning to form. It was always like this, wasn't it? She'd start something new, something that felt impossible, and she'd dive in head first, determined to succeed. But the further she went, the more overwhelmed she felt. Her thoughts wandered back to that first meeting with Professor Andrews, when he'd expressed his belief in her abilities. She had taken those words to heart, clinging to them like a lifeline. But now, as she sat there, defeated by the numbers on her screen, it felt like that belief was slipping through her fingers. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. What if I'm not good enough for this? She thought. What if all of this dream I've been chasing, is just too big for me? A knock on the door broke through her thoughts. Sarah blinked, startled. She had been so lost in her work that she hadn't noticed the time passing. It was past 10 p.m., who could be visiting this late? She opened the door to find Leah standing there, a concerned expression on her face. Mom, I heard you talking to yourself, Leah said, her voice small but filled with concern. Is everything okay? Sarah blinked, surprised by the sudden emotion that welled up in her chest. She had been so focused on her project, so consumed by the pressure of it all, that she hadn't realized how much of it had spilled into her personal life. How much of it Leah had noticed. She forced a smile, trying to push away the feeling of vulnerability that was creeping in. I'm fine, honey. Just a little tired. I've been working on some stuff for school, and it's been tough. Leah didn't buy it. She stepped into the kitchen, sitting down across from Sarah. You're always so strong, Mom. But you don't have to be perfect all the time. Sarah's chest tightened. She loved that her daughter saw her as strong, but the pressure of being that strong every day was starting to feel impossible. The weight of her responsibilities, the constant effort to prove herself, was exhausting. I just feel like I'm falling behind, Sarah admitted quietly. Like no matter how hard I try, I'm not good enough for this. I've been working on this project for weeks, and I'm still stuck. And I can't shake the feeling that I'm just not cut out for this, maybe I should just quit. Leah's eyes softened as she looked at her mother. You've never quit anything, Mom. You've always figured it out before. Remember when you first started working as a janitor? You didn't know anything about the job, but you worked hard and learned. And now look where you are. You're already so much farther along than you were when you started. You just have to keep going. Sarah took a shaky breath, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. Leah's words felt like a bomb on a wound she hadn't realized was so raw. Her daughter was right. Sarah had fought so many battles, some of them physical, some emotional. She had faced difficult times before, but she had never given up. But somehow, this project felt different. The stakes were higher. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore, she was doing it for Leah, for everyone who had ever doubted her. She couldn't afford to fail. I don't know if I can do it, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Leah reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. I know you can. You're stronger than you think. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, grateful for her unwavering support. Maybe I don't have to be perfect, after all. Maybe the key wasn't in never failing, but in not giving up when things got hard. That was the lesson her daughter had taught her without even knowing it. Thank you, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I needed to hear that. Leah smiled. Anytime, Mom. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of the previous night's doubt still lingered, but something had shifted. She had no intention of quitting. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she wasn't going to stop now, not when she had come this far. She spent the morning revisiting her models, approaching the problem from a new perspective. The data she had been analyzing finally began to click in ways it hadn't before. It wasn't a sudden breakthrough, it was a slow, steady unraveling of the problem, piece by piece. By the afternoon, Sarah had made significant progress. The models were still imperfect, but they were closer to where they needed to be. She felt a sense of pride welling up inside her, the kind that only came from hard-earned success. It wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could do this, that she was worthy of the opportunities she had been given. A few days later, Sarah met with Professor Andrews to present her updated work. She was nervous, but she held her head high, proud of the effort she had put in. The work wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. Professor Andrews listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions as Sarah explained her progress. By the time the meeting was over, Sarah felt a wave of relief. He didn't expect perfection. He expected effort, growth, and a willingness to learn. And she had shown him that. "This is excellent work, Sarah," he said, a smile on his face. "You've made great strides. I can see the progress you've made in understanding the material. Keep refining your models, and I think we'll have something really impactful here." Sarah left the office feeling like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. The road ahead was still long. There would be more challenges, more moments of self-doubt. But Sarah knew she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. And with Leah by her side, and Professor Andrews guiding her, she wasn't going to back down now. Her journey was far from over, but Sarah had learned one important thing: the key to success wasn't in being perfect, it was in refusing to quit. Sarah woke up early the next morning, the sunlight streaming through the blinds of her bedroom, casting long golden streaks across the floor. She stretched, feeling the familiar tension in her muscles from nights of sleepless work, but there was something different in the air today. It wasn't just the quiet calm of the morning, it was the feeling of momentum. Today, Sarah was on the final stretch. After weeks of refining her models and wrestling with the economic theories that had once felt so distant, she was close. She could feel it. The project wasn't finished yet, but it was finally beginning to take shape in a way that made her believe she could actually pull this off. But there was still one big hurdle to clear: the final presentation to Professor Andrews. He had been supportive throughout the process, encouraging her to take her time and dive deeper into the material. But the thought of standing in front of him, of finally presenting her work, filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. She dressed quickly and grabbed a cup of coffee, the steam rising in a gentle swirl as she took her first sip. The rich warmth settled in her stomach, a small comfort against the storm of nerves that churned inside her. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly time to leave. Leah was already out the door, heading to school, and Sarah had promised herself she'd give the presentation her all. As she walked to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation. This project had consumed her life for months. It had become more than just a research paper, it was a reflection of everything she had worked for. Every late night, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt had led to this. But as much as she told herself that she was ready, there was that small voice of fear that still lingered, echoing in the back of her mind. What if it's not good enough? What if I can't answer the tough questions? What if he sees through me and realizes I don't belong here at all? The office building where Professor Andrews worked was a short drive away. Sarah parked and walked inside, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights overhead filling the space. She made her way up to the second floor, where his office was located, trying to steady her breath with each step. When she knocked on the door, she heard his voice from the other side, calling her in. Sarah pushed the door open, and there he was, Professor Andrews, sitting behind his desk, his ever-present mug of coffee in hand. "Sarah. Glad to see you made it." He smiled, but there was a warmth to it today, a quiet encouragement. "Please, come in. Let's get started." Sarah nodded, a knot forming in her throat. She sat down across from him, setting her laptop on the desk between them. "All right," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I've made some revisions to the models and incorporated the feedback you gave me. I think I'm getting closer to something that could work. I'd love to walk you through it." Professor Andrews adjusted his glasses, nodding. "Take your time. Show me what you've got." For a moment, Sarah didn't speak. She took a deep breath, steadying her hands as she opened her laptop. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but she kept her eyes focused on the screen. This was it. The moment she had been working toward for so long. She began by walking him through the models she had built, explaining how she had integrated the mathematical concepts with the economic theory. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, the words flowing more easily with each new slide she clicked through. Professor Andrews didn't interrupt, only nodding occasionally, his eyes focused on the screen. When she finished presenting the main body of her work, she looked up at him, anxiety swirling in her chest. "Well, Professor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you think?" There was a long silence. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't help but wonder if she had missed something, if the numbers didn't add up, or if the theory had fallen flat. Finally, Professor Andrews leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the models on the screen. "This is impressive, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of admiration. "You've done an excellent job. Your models are strong, and you've clearly understood the complexities of both the calculus and the economic theories involved. I can see the depth of thought you've put into this." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Was this really happening? He wasn't just being polite, he genuinely seemed impressed. "You've worked incredibly hard," he continued, "and it shows. This is well beyond what I expected. But now we need to discuss the next steps. There are a few areas where I think you can refine your models further, but this is solid work. I have no doubt that you're on the right track." A wave of relief washed over Sarah. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. After all the long hours, the sleepless nights, and the countless moments of self-doubt, it was finally paying off. She had done it. She had crossed the finish line. "Thank you, Professor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much for your support. I couldn't have done it without you." Professor Andrews smiled, his expression warm. "You did the work, Sarah. You deserve the credit. You've proven to yourself and to me that you have what it takes to succeed in this field." She felt a rush of pride at his words, but there was also a deeper sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the project. It was about the journey she had taken to get here, the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had discovered within herself. As she packed up her things and prepared to leave, Professor Andrews stood up and walked to the door with her. "I look forward to seeing how you build on this, Sarah," he said. "And remember, you've earned your place here. Don't ever doubt that." As Sarah walked out of his office, her heart soaring with pride, she couldn't help but think of Leah. Her daughter had been right all along, she had the strength to keep going, even when the path seemed impossible. And now, as she stepped into the next chapter of her life, she knew that the best was yet to come. The week following Sarah's final presentation to Professor Andrews passed by in a blur. It was as though the world around her had slowed down, giving her time to breathe for the first time in months. The weight of the project had lifted, but there was still a lingering sense of anticipation, like the calm before a storm. Her work was officially complete, but something in her had changed. She felt like a different person, a woman who had proven to herself that she could achieve what she had once thought impossible. Yet, as the initial rush of success faded, a new feeling emerged. The sense that she had been moving towards something greater, something beyond just this one project, began to grow. Leah had noticed the shift, too. She had seen her mother working tirelessly, her head down in front of her computer, her eyes glued to the screen at all hours. But now, as they shared meals together and talked in the evenings, there was a lightness in Sarah's voice, a newfound excitement that Leah hadn't seen before. "You did it, Mom," Leah said one evening, her voice filled with awe as they sat in their small, cozy kitchen. "I can't believe you did it. You made your dream come true." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at her daughter's words. Leah had been her anchor, her reason to keep pushing forward even when things seemed impossible. And now, Sarah realized that her success wasn't just about her own journey, it was about showing Leah that anything was possible if you were willing to work for it. "I didn't do it alone, though," Sarah replied, stirring the pot of stew simmering on the stove. "You were right there with me, every step of the way. You've helped me more than you'll ever know." Leah blushed, but she smiled back. "Well, I'm just glad I could help. But I still think you're pretty amazing, Mom." The simplicity of the moment made Sarah feel grounded, as if everything she had done had led her back to this quiet, meaningful connection with her daughter. But there was more than just a feeling of accomplishment at play. There was a deep, unspoken question lingering in the back of Sarah's mind. What's next? It wasn't that Sarah was ungrateful for everything she had achieved. The project had been a monumental success, and Professor Andrews had even mentioned that there might be opportunities for her to collaborate with others in the field. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had climbed this one mountain, but there were still so many more to scale. That question gnawed at her for days. She needed to know if there was a way forward, a path that would allow her to keep growing, to keep proving to herself that she could do even more. But how? What would the next step be? A few days later, Sarah received an email from Professor Andrews that made her heart skip a beat. The subject line read, "Opportunity to collaborate on upcoming research project." Her fingers trembled as she clicked open the message. As she read the email, her pulse quickened with excitement. Professor Andrews was reaching out to offer her the chance to work on a new research project, one that would involve advanced economic modeling and the application of her calculus skills. This project was more ambitious than anything she had worked on before, and it would give her the opportunity to work alongside established experts in the field. For a moment, Sarah just sat there, staring at the screen. Could this be real? This was the type of opportunity she had dreamed of when she first set foot in the academic world. It was an opportunity to push the boundaries of what she thought she was capable of and continue the journey she had started. She knew what she had to do. Without hesitating, she replied to Professor Andrews, expressing her enthusiasm and gratitude for the offer. Her fingers typed quickly, her mind racing with possibilities. This was it. The next step. The days that followed were filled with a whirlwind of planning, meetings, and more work. Sarah dove into the new project with everything she had. The tasks were more complex, and the stakes were higher, but there was something thrilling about it. The people she was working with were some of the brightest minds she had encountered, and she was no longer just an outsider, she was part of the team. Her ideas were being heard, her contributions valued, and that recognition was worth more than anything. But it wasn't just the intellectual challenge that kept her going, it was the sense of purpose that she felt now more than ever. She was no longer just Sarah, the janitor trying to prove herself. She was Sarah, the woman with a vision, someone who could hold her own in any room, someone who could stand tall alongside people with years of experience. Even as Sarah immersed herself in the research, her thoughts continued to drift back to Leah. Her daughter had always been her source of strength, but now, Sarah realized that the dynamic between them was shifting. Leah was growing up, becoming her own person, and Sarah wanted to be there for her, supporting her just as much as Leah had supported her. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sarah returned home to find Leah sitting at the kitchen table, looking a little distracted. "Hey, honey, what's up?" Sarah asked, setting down her bag and taking a seat across from her daughter. Leah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About what I want to do when I get older. I think I want to go into something like you, like the kind of work you're doing now." Sarah's heart swelled at the words, but she couldn't help but wonder if her daughter was trying to follow in her footsteps because of the success she had recently found. She wanted Leah to make her own choices, to pursue her own dreams. "That's amazing, Leah," Sarah said, her voice warm but thoughtful. "But I want you to know something: whatever you choose to do, make sure it's something you're passionate about. Don't do it because you think it's what I want or because it seems like the right thing to do. Follow your heart, sweetheart. It's your life." Leah nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I know, Mom. I will. I just admire what you've done so much. You've worked so hard, and I want to do the same. I want to be as brave as you." Sarah smiled softly, feeling a rush of pride. "You are brave, Leah. Don't forget that." That night, as Sarah lay in bed, the familiar hum of the city outside her window, she realized something important. Her journey wasn't just about academic success or proving her worth to others, it was about paving a path for Leah to follow. It was about showing her daughter that with hard work, determination, and the courage to take risks, anything was possible. And as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was no longer just chasing a dream, she was living it. The weeks that followed Sarah's acceptance of the new research project were a whirlwind. She was now fully immersed in a team of highly skilled economists and researchers, each one an expert in their own field. The work was challenging, but Sarah found herself thriving in this new environment. She was no longer just a newcomer with something to prove, she was an integral part of the team, bringing her own unique perspective to the table. Her contributions were valuable, and she quickly realized that her years of hard work and perseverance had equipped her with the skills and mindset necessary to succeed in this fast-paced, intellectually demanding world. One afternoon, while Sarah was in the middle of reviewing data for an upcoming presentation, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, seeing a text message from Leah. "Hey Mom, how's the project going? Can we hang out this weekend?" Sarah smiled at the message. She had been so absorbed in her work lately that she hadn't spent as much time with Leah as she would have liked. Despite the excitement of her professional success, there was still something more important: her relationship with her daughter. The balance between the two was delicate, and Sarah didn't want to lose sight of what truly mattered. "Let's make plans. How about dinner on Saturday?" she texted back. "Perfect. I'll make my famous mac and cheese," smiley face. "Deal. I'll bring dessert." Sarah sent the message, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at the thought of spending time with Leah. As Sarah worked through her next few tasks, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short period. She had gone from being a janitor in a university to becoming a respected part of a prestigious research team. Her hard work had led her here, but it was the constant belief that she could do more, that she could be more, that had truly pushed her forward. But as much as she had grown professionally, she couldn't forget how deeply the experience of being a mother had shaped her. Every step of the way, Leah had been her rock, the person who made her realize that her work was about more than just personal achievement. It was about creating a legacy, a foundation for Leah to stand on as she ventured into her own future. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that Leah had begun to shape her own path. She was no longer the little girl who needed constant guidance and support. Leah was growing into a young woman, someone who was starting to think about her own dreams and aspirations. And though Sarah was proud of the woman her daughter was becoming, a small part of her still felt the protective instinct that came with being a mother. She wanted to help Leah find her own way, just as she had found hers. That weekend, the two of them sat together at the kitchen table, sharing a meal of mac and cheese, laughing about old memories, and catching up on each other's lives. Leah had recently taken on more responsibilities at school, and her dreams of pursuing a career in economics were becoming more serious. It wasn't just idle talk anymore, she had begun to research colleges and programs that could help her achieve her goals. "I've been thinking about what you said, Mom," Leah said, her voice thoughtful. "About how I should follow my own heart, and not just do what I think people expect of me. And I think I'm starting to get a sense of what I really want to do." Sarah paused, looking at her daughter with a mixture of pride and curiosity. "What do you want to do, honey?" Leah's face lit up. "I want to get into economic policy. I want to be a part of creating change, real change, in the world. I know it's going to be hard, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." "Just like you did." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had always hoped Leah would find something that sparked her passion, but hearing her daughter talk so seriously about it made Sarah's heart swell. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where Leah took the reins of her own future and began to carve out her own path. "You've got what it takes, Leah," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've seen you grow, and I know that whatever you choose to do, you'll be amazing at it. You have the strength, the intelligence, and the heart to make a real difference. I'm so proud of you." Leah smiled warmly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thanks, Mom. I don't think I could have gotten this far without you. You've taught me so much, not just about work, but about life, too." Sarah's heart swelled with pride, but a part of her was still surprised. She had been so focused on her own journey, so wrapped up in her pursuit of professional success, that she hadn't fully realized the impact she was having on Leah's life. It was a reminder that their connection wasn't just about providing for each other, it was about shaping one another, supporting each other's dreams, and building a future together. As the weeks passed, Sarah's work on the research project continued to thrive. She had begun to gain more recognition from her peers, and her work was being cited in academic journals and presentations. Her status in the academic community was steadily rising, but it was the internal growth that felt the most significant to her. She no longer doubted her place in this world. She had come to understand that success was not just about the destination, it was about the journey. Every challenge she faced, every setback, and every victory had been a part of her growth. She was no longer the woman who doubted her worth, she was Sarah, a woman who had carved out a space for herself in a world that had once seemed so far out of reach. One afternoon, Sarah stood in front of a whiteboard in the research lab, explaining the latest data to her colleagues. She was confident, her voice clear and assertive as she walked them through her findings. As she finished her presentation, she looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the team members who had once seen her as an outsider. Now, they were all collaborators, working together toward a common goal. Afterward, as they gathered around to discuss next steps, one of her colleagues, a senior researcher named Thomas, came over to her. "Sarah, I just want to say that I've been really impressed by your work. Your perspective on this project has been invaluable, and I think we can really do something special here. You've earned your place, without a doubt." Sarah smiled, the recognition settling in her chest like a comfortable weight. "Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot. I've learned so much from this team. It's been an incredible experience." As the days went on, Sarah realized that her journey was just beginning. She had come a long way, but there was still so much more to achieve, so many more opportunities to seize. And with Leah by her side, supporting her every step of the way, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Together, they had built something remarkable, something that had changed their lives forever. And as Sarah looked toward the future, she was filled with a sense of purpose and excitement that she hadn't felt in years. The horizon was wide open. And Sarah was ready to embrace it. The weeks that followed brought even more changes, and Sarah found herself standing at the intersection of a new chapter in her life. The project with Professor Andrews had come to an official close, but its impact was far from over. The research paper had been published in a leading journal, and the academic world had begun to take notice. Sarah's name appeared alongside some of the most respected economists in the field, and invitations to collaborate on future projects began to flood her inbox. Yet, despite the recognition, Sarah remained grounded. She knew she had worked hard to get here, but she also knew that the real success lay in what came next. With every new opportunity, there was a greater responsibility to continue pushing the boundaries, to keep growing, and to never settle. One morning, as she sat at her kitchen table sipping coffee, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Her pulse quickened as she wondered who it could be. "Hello," she answered, her voice steady but curious. "Hi, is this Sarah Jenkins?" a warm, familiar voice asked. "Yes, this is Sarah," she replied. "This is Dean Miller from the University of Chicago. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The University of Chicago was one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. It was where she had dreamed of going when she was younger, and now, it seemed as though they were calling her. The gravity of the moment wasn't lost on her. "No, not at all," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice calm. "What can I do for you?" "I'm reaching out because we've been following your recent work, and we're very impressed. Your contribution to the research on economic modeling has caught our attention, and we'd like to extend an offer to you. We'd like you to join our faculty as an adjunct professor. We believe your expertise would be a great asset to our students, and we'd love for you to help guide the next generation of economists." Sarah's mind spun for a moment. This was it, the opportunity she had dreamed of for so long. It was one thing to work behind the scenes, but to be offered a position at such a prestigious university. It was the culmination of everything she had worked for. But even as the excitement surged through her, a part of her hesitated. "Wow, this is incredible," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. "I don't know what to say. This is a huge honor. We believe you're the perfect fit for this role," Dean Miller continued. "We've seen how you've not only excelled in research but how you've built a connection with students in your workshops. We think you have a lot to offer in the classroom, and we'd love to have you on board. Of course, there's no rush, we'd love to hear your thoughts." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her mind racing. The idea of becoming a professor had always been a distant dream, one she had never fully believed was possible. But now, it was staring her right in the face. She had built this life, this career, with her own two hands, and now the doors that had once seemed closed were wide open. "I'll need some time to think it over," she said. "But I have to admit, I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity. Thank you for considering me. I completely understand. Take all the time you need. We're excited to see where your journey takes you next." As she hung up the phone, Sarah sat back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. The offer felt surreal, almost too good to be true. But then, as she thought about everything she had overcome, the years of hard work, the long nights studying and working on projects, and the many challenges she had faced, she realized that this moment was not a fluke. It was the culmination of everything she had done, everything she had sacrificed. She had earned this. That evening, Sarah sat across from Leah at the kitchen table once more. They were enjoying another quiet dinner together, the familiarity of their routine grounding Sarah in the midst of everything that was happening. Leah, as always, was eager to hear about her day. "So, Mom, any new developments with the project? You've been on fire lately, and I'm starting to think you might need a cape." Sarah laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's been a busy week, for sure. But, actually, something huge happened today. I got an offer from the University of Chicago to join their faculty as an adjunct professor." Leah's eyes widened. "Wait, what? That's incredible, Mom. That's like, huge. You've always talked about wanting to teach. Is this a dream come true?" Sarah nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, it feels like it. But I still need to think it through. It's a big decision." Leah's expression softened, and she set down her fork. "I know this is a huge step for you, but you've worked so hard for this, Mom. You deserve it. And honestly, I think you'd be amazing at it." Sarah's heart warmed at her daughter's words. Leah had always supported her dreams, but it felt different now. Leah was no longer just the young girl watching her mother struggle, she was an equal partner in this journey, someone who understood the sacrifices Sarah had made and the triumphs that had come with them. "I appreciate that, Leah," Sarah said softly. "You know, I've always wanted to be in a position to teach, to give back to the next generation. But I didn't know if it would ever happen. And now that it has, I want to make sure I'm making the right choice for both of us." Leah smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, I know you'll make it work. You've always done what's best for us. And I believe in you, Mom." The sincerity in Leah's voice filled Sarah with a deep sense of gratitude. She had always wanted to be the best mother she could be, but now, she was realizing that her journey was about so much more than just her career. It was about building a future that Leah could be proud of, a future where they both stood tall and faced the world together, ready to embrace whatever came next. The next few days were filled with reflection. Sarah spent long hours walking through the decision in her mind, weighing the pros and cons. The opportunity to teach at the University of Chicago was the realization of a lifelong dream. It would challenge her, stretch her in new ways, and allow her to give back to the community that had given her so much. But it also meant making sacrifices, time away from Leah, a new set of responsibilities, and the pressure to perform at the highest level. In the end, though, Sarah knew she had made the right decision. She couldn't deny the excitement that bubbled up inside her when she thought about standing in front of a classroom, sharing the knowledge and experiences she had gathered over the years. She had come so far, and this opportunity was just another step forward in her journey. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and called Dean Miller. It was time to make it official. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "I'd be honored to join the faculty." The call with Dean Miller was just the beginning. The next few weeks were a blur of excitement and preparation. Sarah threw herself into the logistics of transitioning from her role on the research team to her new position as an adjunct professor at the University of Chicago. The office was set up, syllabi were drafted, and lesson plans were organized with precision. Her first lecture was rapidly approaching, and there was a new energy in her life, an energy fueled by the realization that she was truly stepping into her next chapter. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined just a few years ago. When she had first walked through the university's halls as a janitor, she had never dreamed that she would one day be teaching the students who once sat in those classrooms. Now, she was the one standing at the front, ready to impart the knowledge she had gained over years of hard work, resilience, and sheer determination. Sarah found herself sitting in her new office late one evening, reviewing the material for her first lecture. The quiet hum of the university campus outside her window was a stark contrast to the chaos of her thoughts. She had always dreamed of being a professor, but now that the opportunity was here, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. It wasn't just about the material, she knew her subject well. It was the responsibility. She would be shaping young minds, guiding the next generation of economists. She would be a mentor, a role model, and someone they could look up to. But as Sarah sat back in her chair and thought about everything she had accomplished, the nerves began to fade. She had earned this position. Her journey had taught her that nothing was handed to her, she had worked for every step. And now, she was going to give it her all. The first day of class arrived quicker than Sarah anticipated. She stood in front of the lecture hall, watching as students filtered into their seats. The room was a mix of excitement and anticipation. Some students were clearly eager to hear from her, while others appeared a little more unsure. Sarah could relate to that uncertainty. She had been there before, unsure of her place, wondering if she was truly ready. But now, as she adjusted the microphone on her desk and surveyed the room, she knew she was. When the bell rang, signaling the start of class, Sarah took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the room. The students quieted down, some looking at their phones, others pulling out notebooks. Sarah cleared her throat and smiled. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "I'm Professor Jenkins, and I'll be your guide through the fascinating world of economics this semester. But before we dive into the lectures and the theory, I want to tell you a little bit about myself." She paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with a few students. I'm not here because I always knew this was the path I would take. I'm here because, like many of you, I didn't know where my journey would lead. I was once a janitor, cleaning these very halls, and I thought that was all I would ever do. But I believed in the power of education, in the power of hard work, and I never stopped learning. And here I am today, standing in front of you. There was a moment of silence in the room, and Sarah could feel the weight of her words settling in. She knew she wasn't just speaking to students in a classroom. She was speaking to future economists, entrepreneurs, and policymakers, young people who could, one day, change the world. You all have your own stories, she continued, her voice growing more passionate. Your own paths that will lead you to where you want to go. And I'm here to help you on that journey. We'll explore the complexities of economics, but more importantly, I want you to understand how this knowledge can empower you to make a difference. It's not just about the numbers and the equations. It's about how you use that information to understand the world and shape it in your own way. Sarah smiled again, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. This was where she was meant to be. She had worked hard to get here, and now, she had the chance to shape others' futures just as others had shaped hers. The class went on, and as she taught, Sarah felt more and more at ease. She realized that her journey wasn't just about her own success, it was about helping others find their path, just as she had found hers. The students responded well to her, engaging in the discussions, asking thoughtful questions, and contributing their own ideas to the topics at hand. There was an energy in the room that was palpable, and Sarah could see it. These students were hungry for knowledge, eager to learn, and, in their own way, ready to change the world. After class, as Sarah packed up her things, she received a message from Leah. "How was your first day? I know you were nervous. You've got this, Mom." Sarah smiled as she read the message. Leah had been her biggest supporter throughout this entire journey, and she couldn't be more proud of the young woman Leah had become. Sarah had worked hard for this moment, but she knew that Leah's encouragement and belief in her had been just as important as any degree or award. "It went great. I can't believe I'm actually doing this. It's surreal, but it feels right." Sarah texted back. "I'm so proud of you. You've earned every bit of this." Leah's message came through immediately. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She thought back to all the times she had struggled, all the times she had doubted herself, and how far she had come. She had done this not just for herself but for Leah as well, so that Leah could see that dreams were worth pursuing, no matter how impossible they seemed. In the months that followed, Sarah's life continued to evolve. Her role at the University of Chicago became more fulfilling as she found ways to connect with her students on a deeper level. She created an environment where they could explore ideas, ask tough questions, and challenge the status quo. The classroom was no longer just a place to teach, it was a place to inspire, to nurture, and to build relationships that would last a lifetime. Outside of her work, Sarah and Leah continued to support each other, sharing their hopes, their challenges, and their victories. Leah had begun applying to universities herself, and Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the young woman Leah was becoming. She had grown into someone confident, driven, and kind, someone who was ready to take on the world. And as Sarah looked out over the horizon, she knew that this was just the beginning. Her journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more triumphs, and more lessons to learn. But she was no longer the woman who doubted her worth. She was Sarah Jenkins, a professor, a mentor, and a mother, and she had everything she needed to continue shaping the future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?